Yo, good afternoon, everybody. How you doing? This is your coach, Rand. And over this last few days, last few weeks, been thinking about the whole mass shooting thing, right? There are many different points of view that people are talking about the fact that back when we were growing up, there were no mass shootings. You may have heard of gun violence through gang-related incidences, but mass shootings in school was an unknown to my generation. It has only become a thing of this generation today. Now, we can debate different aspects of it, but what I want to talk to you today about is how white privilege and systemic racism has reared its ugly head in this entire thing, when this should be a situation where we're talking about the safety of every child, talking about the fair treatment of every child. Within this situation, we see racism rear its ugly head over and over again. And what really got me into this one was a friend of mine. We grew up as high school kids together, white guy. When both of us went off to the military. My friend he's Republican, conservative, but has some extremely conservative friends on his Facebook page. He recently wrote about how he detests all and every form of racism, how it is driving him to points of not understanding people's mindset. And his statement was very good. And he has repeatedly and tried to balance between both sets of friendships that he has with those who are extremely right-wing and those who are middle-of-the-road conservative. So, in that conversation, one person text that they don't believe that systemic racism still exists, that racism has now become a one-on-one thing, that systematic racism is no longer an issue, and that most laws are designed for the minority. I would have to disagree with that. Have we made some leaps and bounds in bringing equality in our American system? Sure, we have. Cannot deny that we haven't. Any black person who says that things are just as bad as they were in the 1930s, the 1960s, they would be lying. And anyone who says that they're just as bad as the 1700s, you would be lying. Slavery, Jim Crow laws, being able to just lynch a black person at will, those things do not occur in the same way that occurred at that time frame. A white man's word against a black man's word over something like rape, a white man being able to accuse you of rape and murder, and there being no proof of such, is not something that a world that we live in today. But what we do live in is a world where the face of a white kid shooting 9 people in a church, murdering 9 people in a church, murdering 17 kids in a school. A white man who murders people at a concert in Vegas. That the narrative goes to make them the face of mental illness. That they must have some type of mental illness. That they are the face of a broken home. That they are the face of a disturbed mind that had outside influences that could have cured him, could have prevented this situation. This is systematic racism, because if the assailant, if a black man were to go into a white church and murder 9 people, if a black student went to a school and murdered 17 people, if a black man began shooting at a crowd at a Vegas concert, they will not be labeled as the face of mental illness. If they came from a foster care situation, lost both their parents to tragedy, if they grew up in that type of situation, they would not be the face of a broken home, because evidently you have not ventured into some of the poorest neighborhoods where there are many black children who are growing up without their fathers, growing up without their mothers, being raised by grandmothers, being raised by parents who are too young to even raise them. There are many black children who are raised in communities where there's gun violence on a repetitive basis. There are many Spanish children who grew up in situations where there's gun violence all around them, drugs all around them, where they live not only in a broken home, but they live in a broken community. And yet, they don't go shoot up schools. They don't fire into concerts. And for the 1 and 2 that you may find, like the DC sniper, you're not going to find the number of people who are shooting up schools, who are mass murdering at wholesale communities of people who had nothing to do with whatever is disturbing you. Systematic racism is the fact that if you're white, your white privilege gets you the ability of mental illness when you murder 17 people. Because the system of white supremacy that we have says that not one of us could have done such a thing without there being some level of mental problem. Whereas if it's a black person or a Spanish person, then it's just their nature. As Hillary Clinton said, they're just super predators. So it's not a Democratic thing nor a Republican thing. It's a American thing. So to that person who said that it's not systematic racism doesn't exist, that is one-on-one, you're living in a bubble that does not deal in the trueness of reality. We've made a lot of great strides, but we have a long way to go. And one of those things is, if you're going to treat it as mental illness, then treat all of them as mental illness, no matter the color. If you're going to treat it as murderers, then treat all of them as murderers, not just based on color. Remember, we got to free ourselves to be ourselves if we ever want our greatness to reign.